I mean, does your vote really matter if corporations are spending $100 million to manipulate the population?
All right, what's going on, everybody? This is episode 48 of the Sean Lowery Show, and I have a great guest today. We've been following each other for a little while on social media. He's a progressive news host with hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube. He's a bright young guy who I respect, and his name is Joey Olah, and his YouTube channel is Jolah. Makes sense, right? Combining them, and it's
Yep.
political commentary with a post. So, Joey, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, man?
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm doing great today.
Awesome. Yeah. So, like I said, I'm 48 weeks into my podcast, and it's generally about business and entrepreneurship. And kind of one piece of advice for I talk about with entrepreneurs is like just focus on what you're doing and like don't care about like the news on a day to day basis. But I think like this is a great time to kind of have a political conversation, and I thought that's why I wanted to bring you on. I think it's a great time. Uh, so yeah, man. So what's up? So you're a progressive, right?
Yeah. So basically, you probably hear progressive and think really far left, and you think like Bernie Sanders. And I did like Bernie Sanders, but it's more than just to the left. It's complete anti-corruption. Like I'm sure you
Okay.
consider yourself a capitalist.
I do.
Okay, so what we have right now in America isn't really capitalism. We have corporatism. We have monopoly control. We don't have true competition in the marketplace. We need to bring back things like Teddy Roosevelt antitrust laws, break up companies that, prevent smaller people to come up and make better products. And when they do, I mean, they end up getting bought out. Right now in our economy, there's around 15 to 25 million jobs that left because of COVID that were already going to leave because of different things like automation and outsourcing. But those jobs are never coming back. And guess which companies are taking all of that market share? It's
Amazon.
Amazon. Yep, Amazon and Walmart. So, how do we prepare our economy for the future? How do we maintain this mix of socialism and capitalism that we have right now for the future in a world that's owned by Amazon and Walmart? And they use that money to control the government as well. So, that's really
Yeah.
what my focus is.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I actually always consider myself a progressive, but more in like a literal sense. Like I'm all about progress for the country, for everyone. And when it comes to like political, progressive, has like certain connotations and everything, but it's ultimately positive. But that's interesting about the way you look at that. And my argument against that, and I don't really have a strong argument because I agree that we need to keep an eye on Amazon and these big companies. But like I was able to start from nothing, and my business is doing pretty well. And I guess, but maybe like if I'm really successful one day, maybe my goal might be to get bought out or something like that. So even though like there is still a place for people to make it from their garage, right? Like it's
Mm.
not completely uh inhospitable environment for entrepreneurs who are starting from nothing, right? It's the
No,
best. It's
not
the best
completely.
country in the world for that.
Yeah, no, it's not completely gone, but the trajectory we're going at right now is heading towards a position where it might be complete corporate control just because we have a governmental system that can't keep itself in check because of the money that's within the system. So I think all of this can be alleviated by getting huge money out of politics. I'm not sure where you stand on that. Do you think huge corporations should be able to give however much money they want to politicians?
No,
Okay,
no, I
well,
don't. I don't think that. Like my favorite person running in the Democratic Party this time around, which I love the running. I love the debates, and that's my favorite part about politics is the debates and the persuasion and the running for president, like the taking people's minds and shaping them around. But my favorite person was Andrew Yang by far.
mm,
Like if he was running as the Democratic nominee, like there's a high chance that I could have voted for him for president. And he was kind of on this topic a little bit, or no? Like, did you like him? And was he kind of addressing the issue that you're talking about?
yeah, he really spoke a lot on the automation wave that's coming and how jobs are going to be gone. And in the future, with capitalism, there's always a better way to produce things. There's going to be a future where 50% of our workforce is displaced and they simply can't find jobs. And that's where he got his universal basic income from. which is basically like Monopoly. You start off with money and you pass go, you get money. So you could use that money to fuel the whole entire economic system. And I think that's going to be something that we need to be sustainable. But it's important that people have control of the government and not corporations as we do that. Because I
Hmm.
forget who said this quote, but they said, our advancements in technology can either create a atmosphere where all of our workers at the bottom are manipulated, or we're all going to benefit from it. So the entire society should be benefiting if they don't have to work. Because if you think about it, we have renewable resources, machines can do everything. We don't have to have people working. People can pursue their passions more, maybe start their own business, like you did. There shouldn't be a society in which we have these advancements without picking up the people at the bottom. Because I mean, I think everyone's a part of this. Like, from the people from the top to the bottom, we're all part of production and these advancements. This economy doesn't work without all of us participating, and I think everyone should get fruits of it, at least in some regard.
Tough to argue against that. So do you think like a universal basic income and the like corporations controlling the government are two separate issues, or are they connected?
Well, universal basic income can be used as a form of like control. If you think about it, this is a really weird concept I made up in like sixth grade.
Okay.
I was thinking about it in my first economic course, whenever that was. When you look at communism and everyone being equal, if
Uh-huh.
you have a future where 60% of people aren't working, but those 60% are making the exact same amount of money, and corporations control the government and they're deciding how much money the people that are equal get, then do you see what I mean? We're heading towards a
Yeah.
situation where we need clean politics so that the policy of the future is crafted towards helping. Like, if you look at our policy right now, we it's like we purposely do things that don't work. Like our fiscal policy, our tax policy is stupid. We tax the wrong people too much and we tax the wrong people too little. And it doesn't help competition. It doesn't help things be produced. And people think because I'm a progressive, I'm anti-capitalism. I'm not anti-capitalism. I'm anti-cronyism and crony
Okay.
capitalists.
Yeah, and I understand that, and that makes sense, and I think we can agree on that. And like, so are you all for like universal basic income?
I think it needs to be orchestrated very carefully. The number that it comes down at needs to be orchestrated very carefully. And there are certain things like caregivers don't work right now that should be receiving some type of income. I'm not sure it should be universal from an
Okay.
economic standpoint, because one of the main pillars of economic success in a government is money trickling from the bottom on up, or not trickling, but rising. It circulates through because poor people spend money, rich people invest money. They don't really spend money at like a mom and pop pizza shop or a hardware store. We need people at the bottom to have money for the entire economy to produce good enough. So when we're talking UBI, should everyone be getting that $1,200? I saw Mark Cuban had this idea where this should be a conditional basic income. Where, did you see this at all? Where he said
Yeah,
people
yeah,
should be getting $1,000 every 2 weeks, and you either spend it or you lose it as a pure fiscal stimulus policy. There's a lot of different ways to look at this. It's not
yeah,
one set thing.
yeah, and that'll put money back into the economy. The one thing I liked about Andrew Yang was the $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year, and that's not enough where you don't have to work. Because my fear with like any type of universal basic income or communism is like people need to be happy. They need like an objective. They need something to do every day. Like the human brain works where you're happy if you like have something to work for, have something to do. And we've seen a lot of like with nobody working because of the coronavirus, like how much that relates to the protests and how much our people are out there. But like people need something to do. That's why sports are good for the economy and sports are good for people's health. Like something to cheer for, something to fight for. I fear that if everyone has money to live and doesn't need to work, and a lot of people choose not to work, then those people will ultimately think that they're going to be happy. But I think they could be unhappy because they have nothing to dream for, or fight for, or progress and make themselves better people for, to live forward for it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, you could kind of look at the movie Wally as a fun example of where we might be heading, where you see all these people in the big spaceship and the earth is basically nothing, and they all think they're happy. They're on their screens, they're hypnotized, they're huge, they have no more bones because they sit down and they're so lazy. They come back down to earth and they plant something and they're like, holy crap, we're building something. I feel fulfilled right now. And Bernie Sanders had this policy called a federal jobs guarantee, which is this concept where instead of going to the unemployment office, you go to the employment office. And I'm not for that at a federal level, but I do know there's communities throughout the United States that have crumbling infrastructure, sidewalks, playgrounds, and there's people that want to work that can't find jobs that would
Right.
love to work on their own communities, making their own communities cleaner. So I think that is very good for the future when you're talking about people having a purpose. The United States right now, for a rich country, we are pathetic with our infrastructure. When you compare us to European countries, if you've ever been to a airport in a different country compared to ours, it looks like you're in the future in some type of like
Yeah.
science movie compared to.
Yeah, every time I fill out like a political poll, like I always put infrastructure as like one of my top issues because I mean, who doesn't want bridges and roads and like a great airports? Like I think that is something that I'm surprised hasn't been passed because like I think like that's kind of bipartisan in a way.
Yeah, that's the thing Donald Trump lied about because he campaigned on it on
He did campaign on
infrastructure.
that.
And
Yeah, I
he
like
agreed
that
with
when he
Bernie
said that.
Sanders. They both agreed on that issue. But the thing is, those were two populist issues, and those
Yeah.
populist issues don't get through in a corrupt political system. So Donald Trump
Ah.
was all acting badass on the campaign trail saying, I'm going
Yeah.
to fight for the little guy. But he turned into president, and he's one of the biggest corporate sponsors or corporate helpers of all time. And they
Yeah.
basically told him, I'm sorry, we can't get this done. The only thing Donald Trump did get done is that huge tax cut, which went against like Reagan had a huge tax cut and he had
Mm-hmm.
some good things in there to make sure there were loopholes filled. Donald Trump with his tax cut opened every single loophole, which is why you hear like Amazon paying $0 in federal
Right.
taxes. With Ronald Reagan, with every other president, there used to be a 20% minimum tax where no matter what kind of lawyers a corporation can get, they have to pay that 20% tax. Donald Trump's tax plan removed that. So now people can pay $0 in federal taxes, hurting the deficit, and all these deficit hawks are quiet. But it's just this
Mm-hmm.
whole concept, like I said,
Yeah.
clean politics means we get actual policy that works. And that's what Andrew Yang does. He looks at things analytically, what works around the world. Let's try that here.
Dude, I was so surprised during the Democratic uh, nomination or the, the whole debates and the whole thing that Andrew Yang didn't get more votes. I was so surprised, man. Who did you like in there out of those guys? I
I,
think there was 17 or 15 or
yeah, it was Yang and Bernie. And
Yang and Bernie.
yeah, you look at Bernie. People usually look at him as the pragmatic side. Like he thinks this will work as he's saying it, but him and the AOC, even they're seen as really radical people,
Yeah,
and the way they approach things is idealistically, and their whole theory of politics is to say what a just world should be, and
right,
then we'll meet the pragmatism on like the Senate floor. We'll
right.
find out what the compromise is on the Senate floor because if we argue the pragmatic position, then we're going to get pulled to the opposite side. If you don't argue what you really, really want, then the other side always wins. Because if Donald Trump says, you know what, screw it, we're going to build a wall, we're going to send immigrants out of the country, but you just fight for the middle position, then you're pulled to the right if you don't fight for those idealistic stances. So that's why they seem very unrealistic. Although when you
Yeah, they do.
yeah, like with like universal healthcare, for example,
Hmm.
every country in the world other than us basically has a universal system of some sort. And Medicare for All was a complete overhaul. And that creates a one tier system. So everyone has the same healthcare. And people like that idealistically because everyone's in it, everyone pays into it, which means the rich won't let the program fail because they have to use the program. Australia has a system that's two tiered. So you have one tier that's guaranteed healthcare, and there's a second tier that if you're successful, you make a lot of money, you can buy your way ahead of the line. And like the UK has a full nationalized system where doctors work for the government as well as the insurance. Like single payer is just the government pays as insurance. There's all these drastic forms of universal healthcare that are different that we could try, but the debate isn't on that. There's either no universal healthcare, complete universal healthcare, and
Yeah,
gridlock in politics. If we looked at things
gridlock.
analytically, then we could find a system that
Yeah,
allows you to buy supplemental insurance if you're rich and get ahead and
yeah,
still allows poor people to have necessities.
yeah. Yeah, healthcare is a tough one, but like when you think when Trump was campaigning and was talking about the infrastructure, for example, and then or no, sorry, the tax breaks. He had an idealistic populism like way of thinking about it, and then when it actually went through, it was more like for the corporations. Do you think that was like how he planned it all along, or do you think he had to like make compromises along the way, or do you think he kind of learned how it really worked and just tried to have the best thing that he could say back to the people, like, "Hey, I got this passed," or do you think
I
he like has
think
a secret plan, or do you think he kind of like didn't get exactly like what he wanted?
no, if there's one thing about Donald Trump, it's that he operates on public opinion and how he's feeling. I mean, he's been a showman his entire career.
Yeah,
The Trump brand was never about business, it was about Trump. He
yeah,
sold himself, like you're big on the entrepreneurship stuff.
yeah,
He like what did he have to offer other than Trump? Like
yeah,
Trump is big, Trump is beautiful, Trump is luxury,
yeah.
and Trump is the wealth. Like Trump doesn't have the skills for the wealth. Trump, I mean, he
Yeah.
won't give out his grades from school. He's not the smartest guy, but he knows how to
No,
convince people
he's
that that he's right.
he's a persuasion and branding genius for sure. Like I
I
think
saw
that's
you
his
reading that book, The 48 Laws of Power.
48 Laws of Power. Oh my gosh, I'm all into that book right now. And every time I read one of the laws, yeah, actually, yo, hand it to me. I got it right here. I got it right here because I've been doing like
Yep.
TikToks about it and reading about it.
Yep.
And I'm always like, damn, this is Trump. This is Trump. Like he definitely has either read that book or like understands the principles of that book. But I mean, I voted for Donald Trump. I voted for Obama and I voted for Trump, and I like him. Like I like the showmanship. I like the positive. We're the best thing. And I admit, like sometimes when it comes to politics, like you seem like really into policy, and I'm not a big policy guy. I'm more of like a
Mm.
persuasion and
Yep.
like persuasion guy. And I
And
and,
most
I,
voters are.
yeah, and right, most voters are. And so right, when it comes to those things, I think that he doesn't understand all the inner workings of Washington, but he's just trying to think, all right, how can I pitch this to make myself look good? How can I pitch this to
Mm.
make myself look good? And I don't know if that's good or bad. It's probably bad. I
Yeah,
don't
it's just
know.
to look good because when you talk about like infrastructure, I'm sure he got there and they said, okay, you ran on that, you won on that, but we're not going to do that. Infrastructure is one of the best ways to spend money and to
Yeah,
stimulate the economy.
why wouldn't the other side want to do that?
That's the number one thing to do if you actually want the economy to pop. I'm sure you like the stock market, but that doesn't show the true wealth of a nation. That just shows complete production, the GDP
I heard
levels.
something about the stock market lately that I thought was so funny and kind of true. And it was said it's a graph of rich people's feelings,
Hmm. Yeah,
and I kind of like that.
it
Like
is
it's
though.
yeah, because it's not like a it's in the future. It's not
Yeah,
like current economic information. It's you're right, and not everyone is involved in it. So right,
yeah.
the stock market definitely doesn't show everything that's going on with the country. But when it's high, Trump will definitely be like, "Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
but then
because of
when it's
me."
low, he's like, what is the stock market? I never heard of it.
He'll blame it on like the Fed or something like that. And
Well,
that's actually one of
yeah.
that's actually the 48 Laws of Power is like it's a dark book, man. It has some
Mhm.
laws in there that I'm like, are you serious? And one of them is just like blame things on other people if it goes bad. And it's like, I was like, seriously? I was like, you can't teach this to like kids and stuff. And yeah, he definitely will do that. He always will find a way to pitch something positively. And I like that attitude because I'm all about like, no matter what happens in your life, like stay positive, fight through it, all that stuff and stay positive. And I like that about him that he does do that.
Mhm.
But that it definitely has some negative effects too, as far as just not, just trying to make it push through with positivity is sounds good, but
Yeah. And
uh,
it sucks too because when I come across a voter like you,
yeah,
I can't convince you to vote Biden because he's such a I think anyone who pays attention to him like really closely knows there's something off there.
yeah.
And his age of politics is really old. I mean, there's a new
S-
populist wave. People want to be spoken to. Like that's why
Yeah.
Sanders was so
So
successful.
I will say like Joe Biden, I feel like everyone talks shit on him.
Yeah.
I don't hate the guy. Like he first of all, I know there's many strings being pulled, etc. He
Yeah.
won. He won. He won. He beat all those people. He beat Klobuchar. He beat Yang. He beat all those people. Buttigieg, like that's impressive. And honestly, like the no malarkey thing, I kind of like that, man. It's kind of funny. It's like old school, like tough, like old man kind of
Mhm.
stuff. Like I respect and like him from like a persuasion standpoint. But And then also, I feel like everyone gives him he's losing his mind thing,
Yeah.
and I think that's partially true. But when you think about a president and you think about like George Bush, like if I go back and type in George Bush into YouTube, there's all like the stupid shit that he said, and
Yeah.
I'll put food on your family. It's almost like presidential to like have off the cuff stupid things that you say. So like, I don't know, man. I don't hate Joe Biden. I respect him.
Yeah, Donald
Uh,
Trump is another case of that where he's kind of cognitively not there sometimes. There's been
yeah,
theories about
he has slips of the tongue for sure.
yeah, like when he's like talking in front of big crowds of
Yeah,
people, he's
yeah.
often sniffing a lot.
Yeah, he is. I enjoy it. I enjoy watching his rallies, like just for. I mean, there is that sake if you don't know what he's going to say. But one thing he always does, and I've noticed this from a public speaking perspective, is he'll stutter his words, and then he'll go, "Hup," and then he'll like, wait, and he like refreshes and like repeats himself. But you can tell, and it's actually like a good little public speaking tactic, because he totally is getting off track and messes, and he go up, and then he'll like repeat himself, and he does it all the time. And I've been waiting for like someone on late night TV to make fun of him for it, and finally I saw someone do it, and they just pointed out all the times that he did that. And yeah, he definitely has some slips of the tongue as well.
The thing about Trump that worries me
Yeah,
is he does create a lot of chaos. And we're at a point in
he
history, as you can
does.
tell, where chaos is already arising for other reasons
Yeah.
on top of that. And when you look at, I've said this for a while now, for 2 years before all the, shit hit the fan.
Uh huh.
When any society reaches this level of income inequality and the people at the bottom feel like they lost control of government, that society usually is either reset by a Great Depression, a war, or a revolution, or some type of big fundamental restructuring of the government. And I think we're at a point right now in history where, I mean, inequality right now is higher than it was ever before. Of course, people at the bottom are better off than before because of overproduction of resources, which is, I think, a capitalistic property. And it's great that things are produced at that level.
Everyone
But
has an iPhone, and everyone
yeah,
has
well, that's a
McDonald's.
good
Everyone
point
has
too.
food and shelter.
But they sort of took the people's power in government and replaced it with an iPhone or a television. Like if you're a working class family, you have zero power in government. Even if you vote for somebody, I mean, does your vote really matter if
Mm,
corporations are spending $100 million to manipulate the population? Because, like
right.
you said, a lot of people go off of feel. A lot of people don't really go off of what the corporations are making politicians do. And like, I don't blame people for not being political. Politics
Yeah.
sucks. When I do,
Yeah.
I did a 4 hour stream once covering when Iran that whole escalation was happening at the
Yeah.
beginning of the year. I was tired after that just from reading all that stuff. It's depressing, it's
Yeah.
emotional. It's
You're
not
right.
fun. I don't blame
Right.
people for not being in politics.
Right.
But I think if we keep on ignoring certain issues for a long time and let them fester, I actually call this a band-aid theory because we
Okay.
get a wound, we put a band-aid on it, we never heal the wound, but the cut becomes infected and we keep covering it up, but eventually that infection becomes too big
Yeah.
and we can't
So
ignore it.
yeah, I actually saw you talk about the Band-Aid thing, and I have something on that. But all right, so let's talk about the protest, right? Because that's the main thing going on right now.
Mm.
So you mentioned inequality and the wealth gap. That doesn't seem to be the focus of the conversation. The focus of the conversation seems to be racism.
Yeah, it's all intertwined. And I think the media is making it all about racism. It is a lot of racism. There's a lot of systemic issues at hand, and
I
there's a
want to
lot
talk
of
about
wealth
that.
issues at hand. And it's all combined into this big mixing pot of pure destruction because racism is like classism and poor economic conditions as well. You don't have this many people rioting in the streets if the economy is good. And the people's power in government matters too. If the economy's good, people have money to donate to
I mean, the
politicians
economy
they
was
want.
great.
And
The economy was great like 2 months ago. Like,
but for the people at the bottom, though, they aren't buying anymore; they're renting. And I'm sure you know about like ownership. If you want to
yeah,
accumulate wealth, you need to own. And this whole
right,
generation coming up, all those people in the street, I guarantee they're all renting. And
right.
renting is basically like dumping your money out
I
and
mean, they're
staying in a hotel.
also a lot of them are young.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like the whole younger generation, they're not being taught how to own things. They're not getting a chance to own things. And I think that's one of the bad things about the economy right now is when it does reach a recession, if no one owns anything, if you don't own the house you live in, then what do you do? Where do you go? Where do you get
Yeah,
food from?
yeah,
Food banks are longer right now in the United States than they were since the Great Depression.
yeah.
So that's something like a universal basic income can help solve. If you and our
Interesting.
stimulus
Yeah.
in this country for the coronavirus was actually the worst response in the world for regular
You think?
people. The twelve hundred
Yeah.
dollars for 4 months. Other countries were doing $2,000 per month for
Okay.
most citizens. The unemployment we gave was too much in some areas and too little in others, and that's another issue we have is property values and how much money people have in certain areas. Like if you make $15 an hour where I'm from, you're making good money. But if
Yeah.
you make $15 an hour in New York, then
That's
you're
nothing.
making $7 an hour where I'm from.
That's nothing.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's two
So yeah, let's
Americas.
talk about the like the structural racism because I think that is an interesting topic. So let me give you my because I don't really know what it is.
Mhm.
So let me give you my kind of take on like racism, right? Two white guys talking, I get all that. So I'm like an American history nerd, right? I love the stories of our country, the good and the bad, and I love America mostly because like I live here and I'm like a person who like loves like everything that's around me. Like I just love, I'm a loving person, so I love this country, and I'm knowledgeable about our history. And I think it was someone maybe like Condoleezza Rice said we were born as a great country, but we had one problem in our birth defect, and that was obviously like slavery, right? So it's very important to me, and it's always been very important to me throughout my whole life that everyone's treated equally. And I think a lot of people can say that, but and I love America because that was kind of written into the goals of our country. Ironically, at the beginning, of course. But history aside, like I've been talking about my favorite movies lately, and two of my favorite movies are Remember the Titans and Ray, and both of these are the 50s, 60s, 70s, where uh, the racial times where structural change like was needed, like school integration and such. And I fell in love with these stories as a young kid, and I made a promise to myself that I will never ever judge a person by their skin color. And over the years, like, and I'm a mindset guy. Like, I believe that if you tell yourself something over and over, you can have certain beliefs. Like I promised myself I'm going to be a millionaire, and I made my brain believe it. I've made my brain uh, believe one fact, and I've done it since I was like 12 years old. It's that skin color doesn't matter, and it's very important to me. And as I've grown up, all I've ever seen is kids having posters on their wall of Ken Griffey Jr., Michael Jordan, like Lil Wayne, like cultural icons in America, and then Obama in 2008, and then one thing that I think was a huge moment that I don't even think gets talked about enough was like I thought it was like the breaking point of America was actually Jussie Smollett. I thought at
Mm.
that moment that like it was a defining and like unifying moment for the country because I thought it kind of made racism like kind of just look silly. So basically, like I've spent a lot of time in my life like being really proud of our country for like how we've dealt with this birth defect and this racism and like how we've like overcame it. And now these protests are going on, and at first I was like, rolling my eyes a little bit because of come on, like we changed these laws in the 70s. There's no laws in place anymore that are structurally racist, and honestly, like that was my thought the first couple of days. Now it's been like 7, 10 days of this like protesting stuff, and I'm at the point again where I'm like, all right, I'm open minded. Like what can I do differently? Like what is this structural racism? What is this? And like how can we finally like end this conversation and move forward? Like what do you think about that?
Well, that's great that you have the mindset that you want to listen and learn more about how we got here, what we can do in the future to get better. And I think it's important to know that, like, right now we're dealing with law enforcement. The first ever national law enforcement agency ever assembled in the United States was made to catch runaway slaves. And the entire goal of law enforcement went from slaves to when they were freed with segregation to slaves and poor people. So law enforcement was just so slaves and poor people don't get out of hand.
Dude, I
And
mean
it kind of
that's not what
morphed over time.
that's not what law enforcement is though.
But
Law
that's how it
enforcement
started. And that's
that's how
that's
it's,
sort of how it's continued just in poor areas. They feel more militarized than they do replenished. So like for example, New York City has this big fund from 9/11. So they got all this money for policing after 9/11 and there was no oversight on it. And they have the 33rd highest military funding in the world when it comes to countries. And that's one city in our country. And they use all of that on the people. They spend more on military. They spend 10 times more on military than they do education, housing, healthcare, um, and food combined.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the things we're trying to
So
reach into is
the
that struggle.
defunding the police thing, like I'm actually open to that conversation. And it's basically taking less money, taking some of the budget from the police and putting it into like education and mental health, right? That's kind of the pitch.
And they also want to operate it sort of like a school board would be operated, where you have leaders from your community being very transparent about what the police department is doing with their resources and make sure they're not hiding anything. And we need to make sure the police union isn't too strong. And we have this thing called qualified immunity. If you've heard about that in the past couple of days,
No.
where if there already isn't a precedent set in law for an officer to get arrested, like through a court, if they do something, they cannot get arrested for it. So even if there's one small difference, if they be a lady in the middle of New York in a dark alley, and there was a law specifically about that in court, but there wasn't one about in an open field or something stupid, there's qualified immunity for law enforcement that they can't get in trouble for that. And then the police unions all influence the politicians with their money. So there's a big power struggle here. And I think that's really the issue with government as well. Like it's what I'm getting back to with government in general. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be ran by the people. It needs to have no money influence in decision making. We
Yeah,
need to be
sure.
at policy decision
Yeah.
making processes and defund the police. Um,
I mean, if someone breaks into my house at night, there could be a cop there with a gun, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's just they want to. Obviously, there's going to be police,
Yeah,
but the current
there needs to be
system.
police. I don't like police. I got in trouble a lot in college for like underage drinking and messing around
And that's stupid
town.
stuff. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
stupid stuff that's illegal in other countries.
right. So like, I'm not some like big police supporter, but like reasonably. Come on.
Yeah, no matter what, there's going to be policing. They
All
just
right.
take down the current system and like reestablish the entire culture. I mean, Nixon established the war on drugs, which like I think whites and blacks use marijuana pretty much equally in
Yeah.
numbers. Blacks get arrested 20 times more. And then Ronald Reagan really ramped up the war on drugs. Bill
Yeah.
Clinton helped.
Just say no, right?
Yeah, and they're saying like we need to prevent these people from smoking marijuana. This marijuana is evil.
That's stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Not now. This year, it's an essential business during.
yeah, and people
Yeah.
are still getting arrested for it, and that's part of the militarization. And it's a majority of people of
That's
color.
silly.
And in our history, people of color are majorly poor. And when you're poor and you have low socioeconomic standings, you're more likely to be in gang culture because that's why they call it a trap. There's no way out. They try to get quick money, and
So what is structural racism?
it's
Because I honestly, like, I've thought about this a lot, and I don't know what it is. I don't understand it, and like people always say it, and I'm like a bad guy if I'm against it, and I'm just like, what is it? Is it like I can understand now inequality between a poor person and a rich person and the lawyers and court? Like I get that. If you have more money, you can defend yourself better. But how does that have to do with race?
well, I had a couple studies that I studied. It was done by a different person at my college, a professor, and it was done in Milwaukee and Chicago. And the study found that white people with felonies got hired at twice the rate of black men with completely clean records. And this is a very common trend throughout the United States. And you might not see it
Yeah,
every single
but
day,
that's
but
not. Yeah, I guess like that's not like
that's
a like
systemic.
that's not like a law. That's not like
No, it's not a law, but it's
yeah.
hidden.
It's like it's and where is it hidden in people's minds?
It is in people's minds. They assume people of color to be in crime-ridden neighborhoods from the get-go, or they might just be completely bigoted. I mean, a majority of Americans are born with some racist ideology. Like the history books in
Do you
high
think
school
that
leave out a lot.
like people
Like
are
I
born
was.
like people like explain that?
Like I don't think I'm in a majority like 98% white area. And when I
Okay.
read through my history books, they basically said, well, we had slavery and then we got to Obama. Everything's good now. And there's a lot in the middle there
See,
we
I
don't
learned
teach.
about Martin Luther King, the civil rights. I learned about Rodney King in '92. I learned about O.J. Simpson. Like that's what Rodney King. That was 1992, police brutality,
Mhm.
L.A. rioting. I was 3, right? So by the time I was 7, I was like aware. I was like knowing about that, and all I was ever taught was skin color doesn't matter. Skin color doesn't matter. It was like ingrained in me as a young person. I grew up in New York public education.
Mm.
I lived in upstate New York. So I don't know, maybe we had different public education, but I learned that stuff.
Yeah, but there's certain intricacies, like, they do learn a lot about, like, Malcolm X and that movement and the other side of
Yeah.
the,
Well,
vice.
Malcolm X, and he was kind of like kill Whitey, kind of, right?
At first, he was more, separatist, so they
Yeah,
said,
I don't
"We
like
wanna
that.
go back and take our wealth away,"
No, I don't like that.
because white people I mean, if you look at from the very start, from slavery, this is why, reparations are a big conversation still.
Interesting.
They
Yeah,
were
that
promised
confuses
40
the hell out
acres
of
and a
me.
mule right away, like, that's where 40 acres and a mule comes from, which is pretty good wealth if you look at the land back in the day, but the reason America was propelled so highly early with their economy is our geographical location
Right,
and our use of slavery for a prolonged period.
right.
Even when you're talking about poor labor after slavery was over, one of the biggest riots of all time was actually in New York. It was a combination of poor working class whites and black people rising up together. So it's not just,
When was that? I think that was that during the Civil War.
I'm not sure what year
I
it
think
was.
it
It
might have been
was
like when they got drafted in the Civil War. I know there was a big riot in New York. They didn't want drafts.
possibly.
I
I
don't know if
forgot
that's
the
the same
exact
one.
year.
Okay.
You may very well be right.
Yeah.
But the system overall does keep down, the way I like to look at it, the system right now is designed to keep down poor people in general. And then
Okay.
race adds another layer to it. Like, black men are 3 times more likely to get killed by the cops in proportion. Like, I think there's an equal
I've
number.
heard stats on both sides of it.
Because
And
there's
actually,
an equal number of white and black people that get killed, but there's 3 times more white people, I think.
okay. Uh, my fiance's uncle, he was wasn't doing the best. He wasn't doing the best into drugs and like not doing too great in life. But he actually got killed by the police like a year ago, and he got like he said like I can't breathe, and like he got tased and killed, and it was very sad, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I don't know, but I guess that's not really. I don't know. I just
Well,
thought of
that's a
that.
good point. I mean, policing is broken in general.
That's
So
what
I think
like
white people should be mad too, honestly.
that's why like I'm all about all these issues, but I just get like a little mad when it's all about race because it's like, is that really what we care about? Like and that's that. Come on, that's what these protests have been about, like on TV and on the media. And is it the media just trying to make it about that? I mean, no, it's the signs and the Black Lives Matter and it's it's just yeah, it's just frustrating to me because I've always cared so much dating back to when I was 13, 14,
Mhm.
and like I thought that it was over. And then this comes around and like, yeah, you seem to kind of be like very pragmatic and like not as emotional. And I appreciate that. But like, not everyone's like that.
Yeah, one of the key things they're trying to get across right now is it's not to not see color, but it's to be able to accept the differences and try to listen to Black Americans and try to see it through their eyes. And I know a couple of people that have told me they have to tell their kids the first thing you tell your Black child, your Hispanic child, even any other minority, is the police are going to treat you differently. You're going to get
I
stopped
think that's a
more.
bad, I think it's a bad strategy.
Well, I know zero white people that got stopped by the cops, and every single Black person I know got stopped by the cops for no reason, and not even just Black, but any
But if you tell
minority.
people that, then they start to expect it. Like expectations are very important. And if you tell a young kid you are not equal and you are going to be treated unfairly, and they're only 6 or 7 with a developing mind, then they're going to have that thought in their head as their brain develops, and they're going to believe that. And that's not even what they should be thinking.
But
Like I
that
think
is an issue though that they're facing. They do get like my friend who does music, I knew him more in high school, but getting stopped by the cops multiple times for no reason and just being scared because they come up, they say, "Hey, are you okay? Like, what are you doing?" And they ask, what am I being arrested for?" No answer. They're just being profiled. They're being stopped for no reason. They have to make sure they show their hands. There's a story of Philando Castile who is, he had a permit to carry a weapon and he was reaching for that permit and the cop shot him. And I don't think a white person would be in that same scenario of you saying, "I have a weapons permit, I have to reach in my pocket and get
yeah.
shot." And one of the big issues with race there is you didn't see anybody who advocates like from the right for the Second Amendment for responsibly carrying guns with a permit. You saw nobody standing up for that fight. So that's
Right.
part of it as well. What fights are people going to stand up for? What
Yeah.
fights are politicians going to represent and actually enact in policy in government? It's really deep, it's really complex, and it is really hard to see because over time, racism went from slavery to segregation
And
to Jim
right.
Crow laws.
Right.
Once we got
Serious.
rid of Jim Crow laws, they
Right.
put it right. That's when they established the war on drugs. So right when they
Mm.
got rid of Jim Crow laws, isn't that funny? How that's when they start the war on drugs. That was the next what we call racial caste system. Like they have the caste system in India.
Yeah.
That's what they call it today, and they're trying to break that completely. And that's why they want to reestablish police and build it up as something different. Because the police, I know, like not everywhere. Like in big cities, they are militaries, but in the middle, like I'm not sure if you live in a big. Do you live in like a
I live in
metropolis?
Charleston, South Carolina, which is a
Yeah.
mid-sized city.
Mm. Yeah, so mid to small cities, like I'm in a small city,
Yeah.
they're not going to have huge militarized police forces. It's going to
Yeah.
be more local. But when
Right.
you have NYPD, when you have LAPD, when you have all these people coming in that don't even live inside the areas, you have
Yeah.
white cops who are watching rap videos and assuming that's what black people are like and coming in. That's not the right way to do it. And it is really complex, but it is
Yeah.
there. And I encourage you, I mean, if there's anything else we could, you want to have a conversation about, but I encourage you to keep on looking into that topic.
Yeah, I'm totally open-minded. And I get like in the 90s, it was like the whole NWA, like fuck the police.
Yeah.
Like that was like a whole like that was like a just like oh fuck the police, fuck you. Like all right, so that was kind of like a turf war or like
Mhm.
and then the whole OJ thing that was around the same time and like the courts had him win. I don't even know how that was about race because he obviously did it. But
Well,
it's
that
just
was payback for Ronnie King.
uh,
That's what they said.
that's what they said, which is like
Yeah.
let's just not have it be about skin color. Like and that's like I that's all I've ever like trained my brain to think that skin color doesn't matter. Like I have 16 employees, 15 employees. I think like I don't know how many are black, like 6 of them or something like that. Like, but if I had 15 white or 15 black, I just don't care. Like it just doesn't matter to me. And honestly, like if everyone was racist and wasn't hiring black people or something like that, like I would be like, awesome. I'll hire them all at like a lower wage or something. Or the same thing you could say about like women in the wage gap like that. It's just crazy to not like take advantage of opportunities in front of you. And I've had spent so much time
Mhm. Yeah,
on
you have
skin.
the right moral goal in your mind. I think
Yeah, that's my
the
thing.
only thing is like,
I think I have the absolute right moral goal. Skin color doesn't matter. Now,
yeah.
my question at this point in time, as it's all being brought up, is that is that right? Is it or should I treat people differently by their skin color?
No, you shouldn't treat them differently,
Or like
but you should like recognize that their experience in our country is different from yours.
okay, and how? Like I'm an empathetic person, but I'm not really like a sympathetic person, really. Like I don't have a lot of sympathy. Like I'm like, all right, well, deal with it. Your problem. Like, and maybe that's just one of the reasons why maybe like some of the things I say come off like rude or like
Mhm.
because I know a lot of the difference between and I heard someone talking about this. The difference between liberals and conservatives is like the empathy and liberals are just asking or like the Black Lives Matter movement are just they're just asking for some empathy and then conservatives are like okay I'll give you a little bit of empathy but we can't like govern with empathy because that's a bad governmental system like is this about feelings or like that's where I'm looking for the structural like racism part because that's disgusts me.
Well, it is just like 80% of owners in the NBA got their wealth and they're white. They got their wealth from traditional slave owning families. I think it's like
What?
70% of our top like look up the numbers. A lot of our
Yeah.
wealth in the US today is from historic slave owning families. And that's why I am in favor of like the estate tax at an extreme level. Like if you're leaving down over $50 million to your child, because when you have money, you stay at the top. If you have $50 million and find a way to get yourself into a lower tax
Shit.
bracket,
I'm not against the estate tax. Like, earn it yourself, man.
like
Like
I don't
that's
think, yeah, exactly, like
that's what I'm
exactly.
all, that's what I'm all about. I feel bad for somebody who's very poor and born on the streets with no money. I feel I don't know about equally, but I also feel bad for a rich ass kid who is born with all the money in the world, and his dad's never around to give him any attention. I feel bad for that guy too, because he doesn't understand what it takes to work for something or build something on his own. And a lot of those kids are the ones that end up like overdosing when they're 17 on like pills or something like that, because they don't feel like any see what like they can ever do in the world. Like,
Yeah. Well, that's great too, because if you're a regular person leaving down money to your child, the estate tax before Donald Trump got rid of it completely was over $10 million finally gets taxed. So any dollar over 10 million gets taxed. It's not the entire amount even. But if you're leaving down $1 million to your child, it doesn't get taxed. So what they're essentially complaining about is, are you kidding me? My child only gets to start out with $8 million. How dare you? And
yeah,
the way I look at this entire system, this system is running as a system. Like, if you benefit in the American system, and you said you're a really patriotic guy,
yeah.
this country creates that system for you to be successful in it. And I think it's right that we pay back into the system that allowed us to be successful once we reach that pinnacle, because I think that's how the game should be set. It should be
I'm
a
not
fair
against
game. It
that.
should be about not just equality but equity. Like, I don't think everyone should be equal, but no one
No
should
way.
starve while they're working two jobs. No one should be in that position of desperation when they have a kid, or if they want to have a happy life, because we have all these amazing things, and there's no reason we should be letting anyone struggle to that extent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can definitely agree with that. I can definitely agree with that. So, yeah, like overall, did you protest?
I'm going on Saturday to a demonstration in central Pennsylvania, up north a little bit. I want to meet some people and see what it's like. It's not
Can't
going to be
believe it's
like
still
a huge
going.
city
Right.
walk.
I'm sure it's gotta have died down a little bit by
It did
now.
die down. The mainstream attention is
Here's the other
gone.
thing I think about like the protesting a little bit. I believe that there is like a protest culture where my mom was an activist and my grandma was an activist, and I have lines of generation in my family who marched with Martin Luther King and are activists, and now some of those people want to fight the good fight, and I respect that, and I get that. And I
They're
just
getting
feel
stuff
like
done.
I just feel
They
like
are forcing change though, because they
like
just
I'm
passed that
talking.
one law about Breonna Taylor. Did you see that?
No, tell me about that.
So there was a no knock warrant before, and they went into this Breonna Taylor's house. If you hear her name, they literally killed her in her sleep. And the
I've
protest
been
have,
hearing her name a lot. I don't know her
yeah,
story.
yeah, that's what happened. She died. She was sleeping. The cops went to her house for no reason and gunned her down 8 times. They shot her, a sleeping black woman, for like, and you're like, what? How does that even happen? So as a result of these protests, now I think this happened a couple of years ago, but now no knock warrants are banned. The Minneapolis Police Department is now restructuring their department to look more like a European system,
That's
and
great.
there's a plethora of things changing across the country.
That's
So
great.
sometimes the only way to enact change, like I said, when you don't have control in your own government, is to shut stuff down to an
Dude,
extent. That's why you
protesting is
see all these corporations saying Black Lives Matter. Do you think
right.
Amazon gives a shit about Black
No,
Lives
no,
Matter?
no. I mean, I don't think that they are a racist, but
They
I don't
just
think
don't
they.
want
I don't,
protesters to shut their production
exactly.
facilities down.
Exactly. Yeah, I get that. And I guess like right, those like little minute like law changes are much less of a part of the history books than changing the Jim Crow laws or school segregation. But that's a valid point. They do work, and I think protests like are effective ways of the people rising up against the government. And I get it. I get it. It makes sense. I feel like a big part of this protest, honestly, was everyone being locked in their house and having pent up energy. Do you think?
Um, I think that added to the frustration and the economic position we were already in for the past 10 to 15 years. And the government literally just doesn't work for the people. So if you're in a economically disadvantaged position, social mobility right now, and this is getting into a different topic,
Yeah, it's cool.
but are you familiar with like the topic of like social mobility?
Your ability to move from one class to another class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So essentially in the US
I
right
feel
now,
like so my thought is America does have social mobility.
Well, like on average, if you look at Democratic states, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure it's higher because Democratic states are more likely to be rich. That's poor people are more likely to be conservative. Democrats are more likely to have money.
it's
But when you
interesting.
look at the country as a whole, the United States is ranked like 13th, 14th, or 15th in social mobility, and that's behind UK even, and that's the other. That's the most far right government other than authoritarian like Russia in the
Really,
world is the UK. Like
really.
they're the most comparable to us of European countries if you want to look at the way that they're handling things with coronavirus and with like their stock market and with business. So if you want something to compare us to, but like these countries like Norway, France, Canada, these are smaller countries.
Hmm.
But when you talk about social mobility, it's actually pretty low in the US for your chances to not only become rich, but if you're born rich and you're a lazy a-hole that just got into a private college out of no merit and you don't work hard and you don't do anything entrepreneurial, then there's a good chance you could just stay there. There's no forces to make them pay into a higher tax bracket or whatever. There's no forces to
Can
make
they can
sure
they
that
drop can
there's
they drop a class?
no, that's what I'm saying. Like,
You're saying
if
they
you're there, you're
can't.
there. If you're not there, you're not there. But there are some
How,
people that get through, and we celebrate those a little too much because if we celebrate too many tokens that are like
and what do you mean? What do you mean the people? What do you
deviations.
mean the people that get through? Like somebody who like started from the streets and now rich, like Jay Z or something like that?
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Well,
I
well,
love that shit. I love that shit.
yeah, it's great. It's great to look at, but it also turns our attention away from all the people who don't. So we look at like you
I
look at
mean,
all these big
the
tech
lesson
executives.
is work hard and you can make it.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that's true. But the issue is the more we say that without paying attention to the instruments at hand, the less of a reality that becomes for average Americans. And I
Okay.
think because once all the jobs left to China, once automation is sweeping through even more now, I mean, automation's been happening for the past 40 years.
Yeah.
And all these small businesses in my community, once a Walmart opened up outside my town, all the small businesses closed because each local economy has a carrying capacity
Hmm.
like ecosystems do in biology. There's only a
Right.
certain amount of capital
Right. You only need
that
to
could
sell a
sustain
certain amount of
business.
pasta, a certain amount of ketchup, a certain amount of household
Yeah.
products.
And the issue is in our communities, people aren't accumulating wealth. They don't have money to spend. It all goes to Amazon and Walmart. It's
Mm.
flowing out of our communities, being replaced with smaller housing that they rent, with welfare, with things that never accumulate value. And this is a big issue in America right now is how do we restore the American dream of owning your house that is not just a nice house, but a nice, safe neighborhood where you're making an honest living and you could have a comfortable retirement for everybody. And I think the way to achieve that is to try to get everyone who did get through and did become successful, try to get them to come back and be like, this is what we need to do to build. Not only because government is crooked, but I love what like different black entrepreneurs are doing right now, supporting black business as well. They're using. I support socialist properties to help fight this treachery in the system right now, but I also support building up capitalism as well in these people because you not only need to de-establish this government, but you need to have people who are ready to take control when it's necessary. You know what I mean? Like teaching people those necessary tools of growing that business once we finally get the government to comply or something
Yeah.
along those lines.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard the way that you put things. I like the way that you put things because it's. I mean, it's hard to disagree with that. Like, and I love the way that you like approach it. Very even minded. And yeah, man. So do you have hope for the country?
Well, there's a lot of issues, obviously.
Yeah.
I think there is hope in that our younger generation coming up, although very idealistic, it's one of the most informed generations of all time. Like Twitter right now has served as a check on politicians and on
Yeah.
corporations, even
Yeah.
how funny that might seem.
It's crazy, but it's so true.
We have all these private investigators inside their houses that are pissed off at the world that
Mm-hmm.
want to destroy these people who are destroying us. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really beautiful thing. I think that's where the hope lies. It lies in the younger generation to come sweep through with change because once you have people who are 50, 60, 70 years old, you are not changing their minds. So I think the younger generation needs, I know this sounds bad, but we need to wait for certain ideologies to die off so
Mm-hmm.
that we can take control and right the ship before it's too late. And I think that's where the hope is.
Okay. All right, just wait for people to die.
Well, I mean,
I hear
okay,
it. No, I'm with you.
ideology, not people.
Ideology. I got you. I'm with you, and I get what you're saying. And yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful. But yeah, man, that's awesome. Who's your favorite president of all time?
Hmm. An easy answer would be the Roosevelts, both of
Oh,
them,
they're
just
two different. They're
because
two different guys. No, you gotta pick one. They're different.
FDR is the most like what I think we need right now. I'm not one to be a huge fanatic of politicians. I do like Sanders a lot, but once he like dropped out and stopped supporting the policy that I wanted, like I
Well,
still love the guy, but I'm not gonna bow down to him. But FDR right now would be my favorite, just because, especially, I think we need those reforms, like
yeah,
a New Deal again.
public jobs. Conservatives like hate FDR. Like I, from like a centrist standpoint, like dude, he is hard to argue. He should be on like Mount Rushmore. He got us out of the Depression, won World War II. Like he's an amazing president. He was there for so long, whatever, like 16
He got
years. Or
elected
whatever.
4 times. Yeah,
That's
like he
crazy.
died on the final term because of polio,
Right. Oh,
and he
dude,
did this the entire time. He couldn't walk.
I think it's one of the saddest stories in American history that he died like I think it was like a month before Hitler, like 2 months before the war ended, and like I would have loved to seen him like be able to celebrate the war, but yeah, Andy was in a wheelchair, man.
Yeah.
FDR is so underrated as one of the greatest presidents of all
Did you
time.
ever see the videos of him or the pictures being propped up by like his brother or something because he couldn't walk? But he didn't
Yeah,
let the public know he couldn't walk.
that would
So he had
never
these
work
braces.
today. That would never work today.
Yeah, he was kind of like doing this up to the podium. Today, I mean, there's too many cameras
Yeah,
everywhere. But him being so
you hear that,
popular,
Teddy?
him,
Yeah,
him being so popular is one of the reasons that they try to prop up Reagan so much. People on the right do, because if you look throughout American history, Abraham Lincoln, like the party's realigned since then, so he was really in the middle, like a centrist ideology. He wasn't really Republican, although
right.
that's what the name of the party was. Because if you, it doesn't. I hate when people say the Democrats started the KKK and the Republicans free slaves or whatever, because
That's true, but
yeah,
but it
like
flipped. It
technically,
kind of flipped.
yeah, like technically, yes, but if you want to do everything by semantics and labels, then I guess
Exactly.
we should just stop talking, because we could just make up words and
Exactly.
have it mean things.
Exactly.
But that's one of the reasons they propped up Reagan. If you look through history, who are the great Republican presidents that were really far right? You have like Herbert Hoover.
Oh, Hoover
Well,
sucks.
he
This
was.
is my favorite president. No, and he wasn't far right. He was a centrist. That's what I like about him. But
Yeah, like
Hoover was far
trespassing.
right. Hoover was like known as the worst president of all time.
Oh yeah, Hoover was like totally. I'm not going to do anything. The free market's going to take care of all our
That
issues.
didn't work.
The Great Depression came. People had to make Hoovervilles and camps to sleep in because
That's
they
like the
couldn't afford
worst.
their houses.
That's like what he will be remembered for. Hooverville. That's a terrible
Yeah.
way to be remembered.
Oh yeah, he's definitely the worst president of all time. I
Yeah.
can't. I mean,
It's funny how
yeah.
presidents are also judged unfairly based upon the circumstances that they were handed.
Oh yeah, definitely.
For
Like Jimmy
100%.
Carter is a good example of that.
I mean, he was like, he'll be forgotten in hundreds of years, right?
Yeah.
Like, and Lincoln won't. And Lincoln was a great president, but he also got handed this Civil War thing that he dealt with great. But if he didn't get handed that, he probably wouldn't have been remembered as fondly in history. And like, that matters, man, with the situations you get handed. But Teddy Roosevelt, he's my favorite because he's got that, like, kind of the energy that Trump has a little bit, which I love. I love that high energy, like crazy man kind of thing. But also he was a rich guy from New York, but then he went out west and learned how to hunt buffalo. So he got like kind of both sides of the country. And then
So he's basically Joe Rogan.
yeah, he's basically Joe Rogan.
No, but
And then he broke up the monopolies, and he was just a centrist. He preserved the national like parks. I think he's the best.
that is the great thing about both Roosevelts is they were rich, and the second one was often called a betrayer of his class because
Right.
he came from wealth. But
Right.
he's like, you know what? I came from wealth, but I'm gonna do what policies work, and I want to be remembered for being a pragmatic and successful person, not just a rich one. Because I think he understood that being rich doesn't equal success and respect. Although
Right.
materialism is really escalated today
But
to the point where it
but he
does.
was rich long enough to understand that that's not all that matters.
Yeah, like you look at Mark Cuban compared to the Koch brothers, who are the
Yeah,
oil tycoons, and which one would you rather respect, and which one are you going to remember in history who
dude.
actually had a role in society?
Mark Cuban is currently actively running for president, in my belief. What do you think?
He's been looking at it for a long time.
He's
I
definitely
think
been
it's a
looking at it
really
for a long
interesting
time, and
thing.
now he's jumping on every social issue. He was he was a great resource for me for like the PPP, the small business loan thing. He has been talking about like he's just all over these social issues, and he's running for president, dude. He's running for president. I think he should run as a Democrat, and I think he should run like after this whoever if Trump wins again. After that, he should run as a
You know
Democrat.
what I wish? I
Okay.
wish someone like him or Andrew Yang, who are more in the
They're
center,
they're
who have
very similar.
yeah, and they just had the podcast, Yang
Yeah.
Speaks.
I
Or
didn't
just
watch
I
it
didn't
yet, but I
watch it
saw
yet.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to watch that. But they're very similar in the regard where they're like for things like UBI, they come across it, and I don't agree with everything they say. But what matters is when they talk. Like Ben Shapiro, I don't know if you like him, but
I
he
I
is
I watch him and I like him, but I don't agree with him on everything. I think I think he's like a nerd. And
yeah, like
I don't love him. But
he's good at
I watch him.
sounding like he knows what he's talking about, no matter
Yeah.
what it is. He talks fast. He's like, and I know the properties of this, and then he goes into Eminem rap god mode or Logic or something. But when you look at Yang and Cuban, they sound like they know what they're talking about, and that's really important when you're talking
And they
about
have the
reaching across the aisle.
credentials. See, something
Yeah,
that's important for me, and one of the reasons I like Trump, uh, credentials matter to me as far as what you've accomplished in your life. And I mean, I maybe am biased from respecting like people that have had success in business, but that's important to me. Like, I don't like someone who's was went to school for political science, and then when they were 24, was a local politician, and then by the time they're 35, they've been in politics. Then by the time they're 50, they have millions of favors. They're Washington know-it-alls. Like that is not as attractive to me as somebody who has worked in the I don't know free market or built something, and then they're like, all right, now I'm gonna care about the country from like a higher level. Like that's attractive to me. What about that? What about for you?
well, I was saying just about I wish they would run Republican because I think that would throw the entire axis off if they somehow ran in
Who
that
the
party.
Democrats?
Yeah, if Yang or Cuban took their because they care about like the free
That's what I'm
market and stuff in a
saying.
pragmatic sense. And the biggest criticism I have of Sanders when he went on like if you have ever seen him on the Joe Rogan
Yeah, I did.
podcast,
I watched that
when he
twice.
was on Joe Rogan, people got such a different perception of him than they did when he was on mainstream news networks.
Absolutely.
And when they could actually hear him talk and see his actual ideology, where he comes to his conclusions, what he bases his solutions, and how he finds our problems to be. When they hear that, they like him. My biggest criticism of him was not bringing that to a more broad
He
audience.
didn't like fight enough. He didn't like he's too
This
nice.
time, he just
He's
gave
too
up.
yeah, he's too like nice. Like
I think he really just sees Trump as that big of a threat to American like democracy.
mhm.
Especially the thing right now that this is getting on Trump again, but when Trump said about reenacting the Insurrection Act to bring the U.S. military onto our people, and he's trying
Mhm.
to establish Antifa as a
Mhm.
terrorist organization when something like the KKK isn't even a terrorist organization. Antifa doesn't even have an organization complex. They have
No.
a broad ideology that people ascribe to. Like a lot of people think
Do you think that they're an organized group?
I think there are radicals on both sides that are organized, but Antifa broadly just means anti-fascist to most
Right.
people.
Right.
If you,
It's a good
it's
name.
like, yeah, it is like a catchy thing. But if you try to make them a terrorist group, and you're gonna say you're gonna bring the military into American soil, the actual military, not the Coast Guard, not policing, you're in a position where you're reaching very dangerous levels when it's concerning freedom and liberty because by nature, the military is a fascistic complex.
Mhm.
So basically, you're bowing down to this one force, really nationalist. You're going to follow orders. That's one of the biggest things about Nazi Germany. They always bring up when people got arrested after the war. All the workers and the scientists said, "Sorry, I was just following orders."
Mhm.
And we're in a position if we could successfully name Antifa as a terrorist organization and deploy our military and the military with like their immunity could just say, I was just following orders with what I'm
Mhm.
doing. You're reaching a very scary point.
Yeah. Here's the thing, though. Did he do it?
He didn't do it, but
He's a
I think
talker. He's a talker. Like
he isn't a doer. That is
I mean, I'm not saying he's not a dude. Okay, nice. He floats. He's like when he said the drink bleach thing, like he's just thinking out loud and just like talking and like threatening that like non-real threats, like the North Korea stuff. Like he's just making threats. They're just threats and they're just words. And
yeah, it's for the show.
it's actually kind of effective governing in a little bit of a way because it's like, oh, that guy's crazy. Is he serious or not serious? Like maybe he's serious. And like he just has that and that's actually one of the rules in the 48 laws of power is keep people on edge, be impulsive, and shift your tone and your attitudes a lot to like confuse them. And I don't think he was ever gonna do that, but the fact that he says it matters. But I think it was just kind of a like he tweets like 100 times a day, dude.
I think
it's crazy.
the biggest warning sign to me was when he tear gassed and shot the protesters in order to get the photo op
Yeah.
with the Bible.
That
That's one of
stupid
the
ass
biggest
photo.
things to
That
me.
stupid ass photo shoot.
Yeah, it
or
was a
whatever.
dumb photo too. But
It was so dumb.
that's what leaders do in fascist authoritarian countries when they want to seem beautiful for their people. They tear gas the protesters. They stand there like they did something good. Thank God we have a free and open media and internet,
Yeah.
which may be clamping down soon. But he's supporting things like the Patriot Act, where they can spy on our internet history. So are the Democrats. Our entire government is crooked. But just on Trump, I do think he's sowing a lot of chaos in what's happening.
I would agree with
I don't
that.
think he knows what he's doing. I mean, I think he is just doing it for the show. And when he said he was going to run the country as a business, I think what he does is good for the business world. But when you're talking about how corporations are ran, when you look at how Amazon is ran, they're literally trying to find how to give their constituents, their workers, the products. Well, they give their consumers the products for the top price they can that they'll buy, and they give their workers the least amount of wage that they could give them. And when I think running the country as a business, I'm like,
Yeah.
are you going to run it like a business that gives constant dividends to shareholders and workers?
Yeah.
Or are you going to run it like a business that's trying to control the world?
Yeah.
I think
and
Donald
I don't
Trump-
think a lot of voters like thought about that the way you did. I
Oh,
think
no,
they're just like,
yeah.
oh, business, that's good. Like,
Yeah, exactly. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure if the Democrats have a good response to that. Right now, Biden's up like 14 points in the polls. When it comes to the market and stuff, it'll be the same with Biden or Trump. Biden isn't far left at all. They're going to call him a socialist, but in any
He's
other
not.
country,
He's not.
Any other country,
he's not.
he's a
That doesn't really
centrist.
play as well against him. But who do you think it's a 50-50 chance for who wins or what?
Yeah, because I think Donald Trump has a way to just do it. He has a good way to manipulate people and get them on
Like
his
right
side.
now, like I feel like he's like kind of low.
He's
but-
spiraling.
You
You can tell he's desperate.
But I have no doubt, like that by November, like somehow he's gonna like make himself look good. Like,
Well, that's the thing, though. Like, if you look at the coronavirus, for example, that's mostly affecting Democratic areas, like mostly
Right.
people
Big
in the Democratic Party,
cities,
like
right.
big cities.
Absolutely.
It's not affecting people that are in conservative areas.
right.
And when you have something like the Electoral College, Donald Trump, I think, my prediction for this election since I think January has been that Donald Trump is going to win the presidency while losing by around 8 to 10 million votes. I think he's going to
Damn.
win the Electoral College by maybe a blowout. But like, I couldn't imagine the polarization that would form in this country.
Last
if the
time it
president
was with
elected.
Hillary. With Hillary, it was 2 million.
Yeah,
right?
like 2 or 3. Yeah, it was like 2.5. If I
yeah.
think realistically, if you look at the states, and it's freaky.
That would be bad.
Like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. For a civil discourse,
yeah.
that's why, like, although I don't like Joe Biden, I really do not want Trump to win. And I wasn't even considering voting Joe. I'm in PA, which is a swing state. I wasn't even
Your
considering.
vote's important.
Yeah, and I wasn't gonna vote Joe until Donald Trump did the tear gassing protesters.
But
thing.
you weren't gonna vote for him, were you?
I wasn't gonna. No, I'm not gonna vote Trump.
You were just gonna go like third party or
Yeah, I
neutral?
was gonna like a protest type of thing.
Yeah.
But one of the big issues with presidents in general, and we saw this with Obama and Social Security, since there's only a 2-term limit, that's good for power.
That's great. That's
Can't have a
great.
president forever.
Yeah.
But it also means the second term, presidents are no longer worried about what they're doing because
Yeah.
they're no longer up for re-election.
Right.
So like Obama tried cutting Social Security his second term. if this is first term Donald Trump with an election coming up, second term Donald Trump is going to be the movie 2012. Do you ever see that movie about the end of
the end of the world?
Yeah, like
I
metaphorically.
don't know, man. We'll see. But like, who would be your favorite person to be president after Trump, if you could choose? I mean, Bernie can't. Not Bernie, because he's too old. Like an up and comer politician.
They want someone young.
Like not necessarily young. Like realistically, next term. I mean, this time it's Biden or Trump. The next time, if you could handpick.
Oh, who's gonna run next time? You mean?
No. I mean, who do you want?
Out of who?
Anyone. Like anyone that like realistically.
Well, I do like Andrew. I think he's gonna run again in 2024. I like Ro Khanna. He served Silicon Valley in California. He's a progressive that also works with the corporate world, which is a good thing. That if you are very principled, but you can also work within the capitalistic and right-wing governmental system, that could work. If you could speak to people in the way that I'm trying to talk, where you're saying, here are the numbers.
You're great
I'm
at
making
it,
these decisions based. Well, thanks, but I'm making these decisions based off of numbers. I'm not just believing in these things. They are the right thing to do, but they're also right by a pragmatic statistical sense.
I mean, you got to appeal to people's selfishness.
Yeah, like this is going to benefit you.
Right.
If you benefiting this group of people is going to benefit you in the long run.
Yes,
and
works.
Even if we give a universal basic income to people, then there's not going to be riots in the long term. But if we don't do anything about these issues, then there's going to be another revolution type scenario like we saw in early 1900s France and Russia or something like that. And I don't want to hold that threat over people.
Yeah.
But just like you said, convince them why it's in their best interest. I think that's in the 48 rules of power. You have to convince people that.
Absolutely. And people are inherently selfish because who do you feed every day? You feed yourself. You don't go feed everyone. Like you have to appeal to people's selfishness. You have to. And I think that's a great pitch for a lot of this stuff is this is going to benefit you. And
yeah, that's why I think Sanders wasn't successful, because people weren't thinking about like, okay, I want to help people get healthcare. They were thinking, I don't want to hear Donald Trump on Twitter anymore. So I want somebody who the media is telling me.
And I think that's one of the problems with the Democrats and him was like a little bit too much of like bowing down to the Twitter mob and all the people who are angry and like social justicey, like that's why I like a Yang or a Mark Cuban for the Democrats. I think that would be good for the country. That's who I vote for.
Number one issue, money in politics. Like that's the base of everything. If I could change one thing right now, get money out of politics, establish some type of system where corporations can no longer act as people. My vote should matter the same as Bill Gates. And I know it's never going to be that way.
I mean,
but we're getting close as we could.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yep. Cool, man. So let's leave it there.
All right.
Hey, man, you're the man. This has been a great conversation. And everyone check out his YouTube channel, Jolah Politics. And yeah, man, you're young, right? You're very young.
Yeah, I'm only 20.
You're only 20, man. And I feel like you're like, Kyle Kalinske?
Yeah.
I feel like you're like kind of like him.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah,
I watch him a lot.
He's really entertaining. He's entertaining, too.
And
he knows his stuff, and he's entertaining.
And he's pragmatic and smart, and I think that's the track you're on.
Yeah, he doesn't just say, I feel this way. He says, this is what works. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me on. It was a great conversation.
Man, for sure. And let's keep in touch, and let's do it again sometime.
All right.
All right, everyone, thanks for listening, and peace out.